Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chart Chat. This is Andy Cotgreave. I'm technical evangelist at Tableau. I'm your host today. Thanks for joining the show. We were talking before we started about that music. It turns out you have to be of a certain age to know that song and know that it came from Sesame Street. Apparently, they only used it for a few years. So that turned out that was the Pointer Sisters. Definitely part of my childhood. Anyway, much as I'd like to talk about music, this is Chart Chat. It's not just chit chat, it's Chart Chat, indeed. And I'm joined, as always, by three fantastic, capable co-hosts. Let's introduce them. Steve, say hi.
Hi, Steve Wexler, founder and principal of Data Revelations and co-author along with Andy and Jeff of the Big Book of Dashboards and author of the coming out in May book called The Big Picture. Delighted to be with you all today.
Fantastic. And Jeff.
Jeff Shaffer here, Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of IT and Analytics at Unifun in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I'm also the adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati.
Brilliant. And finally, Amanda.
Hi there, my name is Amanda Makulec. I am the data visualization lead at Excella, based out of Washington, D.C. I also am the volunteer executive director of the Data Visualization Society, and very excited to be joining my three co-hosts today.
Great. Well, it's great to have you all with us. I'm Andy Cotgreave, technical evangelist at Tableau and also co-author of the Big Book of Dashboards. Also behind the scenes is the ever-capable Kevin Flurlidge, who's going to keep us all on time and honest. But also you are all here. So please engage in chat. Tell us what you're thinking, because we love, as we go through this content, hearing your thoughts and trying to answer questions as we go. I'll talk about a little bit about that in a moment as well, because you can do more. But this is round 19. It's February the 25th. And our agenda today is Jeff's going to revisit proportional charts. We're going to follow on from last month. Steve is going to talk about Scaredy-cats, TURDs, which I hope is an acronym. We'll find out. And possibly rant a little bit about Voronoi charts. Amanda is going to talk about how data visualization faces the challenge of visualizing the grim milestone of 500,000 deaths from COVID in the US, and also some of the reaction in the field from New York Times front page. And then in the lightning round, Jeff's going to talk about visualizing election data, and I'm going to talk about blue and orange and possibly try and end my own inner existential conflict about blue and orange. We shall see. After that, you are free to leave, and we would hope you have had a fantastic day. But there is also the legendary after party where the four of us stop talking and we open the mic for anybody on the call who has opinions on any of the things we've talked about in the meeting. It's an open mic session to talk about the topics we've looked at today. Hopefully that sounds good. Yes, hopefully it sounds good. I'm excited. I'm sure we're all excited. So we're going to hand, first of all, straight over to Jeff, who's going to kick off this month's Chart Chat by talking about proportional plots. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. We talked about what we had termed a proportional plot, a blog post from Stephanie Evergreen that we talked about on our last Chart Chat, and some use cases for it. Really, the idea here is one population compared to another population. And the reason we wanted to bring this back up is after the discussion, we realized that we had missed one that was often a chart that was often used for this particular thing, and that is a bar and bar. And so taking the same data, and just a reminder, this is data of the share of the population by race, Black, Hispanic, white, and then the the deaths. This is a subset, this is of a period of time, but comparing the one population to the other. And I wanted to show this again, just to kind of talk about maybe another alternative. Realize that at least in my company, this is often how we show proportions like that. When you have one proportion and you want to compare it to another population, this is that same data where the gray bar in the background is the population, and the smaller bar on top of it is the deaths. And we use this a lot. So just wanted to bring this up. I don't use bar and bar charts a lot. You know, if I'm comparing an actual to a target or an actual to a budget, I'd probably use a bar and a line, a target line, a bullet graph. But for one population size compared to a different population size, I find the bar and bar chart is a good solution for that. So just wanted to recap that and get the thoughts of others on that.
Steve, Amanda, anything?
Just that I think this is spot on, a great way to show it. And I usually stay away from a bar and bar chart because somehow, let's say you want to compare market share for Pizza Hut and Domino's or Coke and Pepsi. If you have that bigger, thicker chart, you're somehow giving more heft to it. But in this case, it makes complete sense to me. And this is a case where the chart, I thought that would be the best way to show this, a classic gap chart or dumbbell plot, wasn't. I think this work is much more effective way of saying, oh, here's the whole population and here is this piece of this particular issue. So I think this is a great way to show the concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Amanda?
I would add a shout out to Jeff's really lovely visual legend at the top. I think that these are really nice ways to make sure it's clear exactly what's being communicated to someone who's trying to read kind of what these different pieces are instead of having a little color legend at the bottom. And it better accommodates kind of that mapping of whether people are just the subgroup is disproportionately killed or not. So just the use of color here and the way that data-driven legend at the top works really nicely, I think are just additional nice features to note beyond a bar and bar chart.
Yeah, visual legends, lots of love for those. I asked Jeff when we were preparing for this, I asked Jeff to send me the data because I always shied away from using bar and bars. I used them a lot in my first year of using Tableau and then stopped. And I find the proportion between the thin and the thick bar really bothers me. And every time I've tried to use a bar and bar, I catch myself about an hour into the process adjusting the sizes of both of them, trying to work out what's the perfect proportion between the two fit sizes of bars for me. And I never seem to settle on what I feel is right. So I think for my own sanity and stopping endless formatting changes, I stopped using them. But yeah, great solution. In the after party, I'd love to know how many people use them in the field, actually. So if you do
Jeff,
use them in the field,
leave that up for a second.
Yeah.
So if I were to say that you know, if I were to see this in the wild, and I would go, is this an authentic Jeffrey Shaffer or is this a fraud? I'd go, well, I don't see the telltale axis ruler there. And so this is clearly a fraud. This is not an authentic Jeffrey
Kevin
Shaffer.
is laughing right now on that same issue. Yeah, I think there is a dotted line there. It's just really, really hard to see. And that I did not change the Tableau default. Yes.
Yeah. You do not have that telltale, you know, the little surprise there, Jeff.
Indeed. Yeah. We have our visual style. Yes, indeed. Brilliant.
By the way, I have a side bet with Andy and Amanda that, you know, before the end of this thing, while I'm in my session, Jeff will redo this and we'll have the more pronounced axis ruler there.
I mean, I think the thing I look at that I know it's probably not a Steve Wexler chart is it doesn't have a left-aligned set of categories on the bars.
Right, the text.
I actually think this is. Oh, she's on to me.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Right, I wonder what my distinct style is. Let's not focus on that right now. Okay, Jeff, thanks very much. Steve, you're going to get into slightly media conversation.
Yeah, I want to. This was kind of really on my radar a few months ago, and it has to do with critique and data visualization. And look, if you look at our tagline in this thing, or a description of every time we have a chart chat, we say, oh, we'll discuss the good, the bad, and the screaming cats of data visualization. What do we mean by the screaming cats? And this came about when Jeff, Andy, and I were doing the big book of dashboards. Let me share my screen. And we recognized that we needed to have an icon in the book that would make it abundantly clear to anybody thumbing through the book whether you should make something like this or not make something like this. Is this a good chart or a bad chart? And without having to read all the text that surrounded it. So we came up with the cat icon. We didn't call it a screaming cat, it was just a cat. And I remember thinking about this, and I even went back to the source idea behind this. I looked at the early version of our book proposal, and we brought, and I alluded to, where we alluded to this character, which is Bill the Cat from a comic strip, which was very funny and very successful in the 80s and 90s. The strip is called Bloom County, and the most beloved character is Opus, the penguin. So we weren't going to get the rights to Bill the Cat, so we had Eric Kim make this icon for us. So August, September, I'm sending out drafts of chapters of this new book, and I got this feedback from Jonathan Schwabish, who just came out with a new book, Better Data Visualizations. I'm not sure that we talked about this before, but I think the screaming cat is a real turn. I think it's mean and trivialize the work people put into their visualizations. So said, well, let me see what other people think about this. And I ended up running two versions of a poll. Here's the first one, which says, what do you think of the screaming cat? Keep it, use something else, and then showed this to Jonathan, and I said, well, maybe you want to have people thinking about this a little more. So to another group of people, I sent out, yes, continue using it as a fun and quick read, or consider using a different icon because it trivializes this. And let me show you the two sets of results I got. Keep it or lose it. Interestingly, I thought this would be reversed. I thought the one that said, oh, you're right, we are trivializing it, would come down much harder. By the way, I think this way of displaying the results, I would give a cat icon, a screaming cat. I think this is a horrible way to compare two pie charts and trying to compare them. This is the default that Google Docs comes up with. Also, I can't help shaking and going, wow, look at all the Democrats who think I should keep it and all the Republicans who think I shouldn't. It's just hard not, blue and red have been co-opted for me. Well, I would have put this aside, and when I get feedback that I don't necessarily relish from people, I'll go, well, if when we were writing the big book of dashboards and Andy would go, I don't know about this, I'd say, well, that's just Andy. Or if Jeff would say something, I'm not really convinced of this, I think, well, that's just Jeff. This is why it's great to have two collaborators. If both Andy and Jeff went, I have a problem with this. And so here was Jonathan's original item. Then I also had Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflick look at this, and she said, no one sets out to make a chart that a cat would scream at. And then a third colleague of mine, a dear friend, Kendall Crowley, she's the president of G100, a global leadership network. And she said, hey, the problem she's having with it is I don't love the screaming cat. She said there are actually 3 designations of graphics. There's, the really good ones that you have. There are ones which are maybe not helpful. And then you have the things that are downright misleading. So she thought you needed 2 or maybe 3 different icons. So, what are we going to do with this thing? There are 281 graphics in the book, 23 are not helpful, and 9 are misleading. And I'll give you an example of misleading. And here is something where this is a minor infraction, vertical text. How do you tell somebody, hey, you probably shouldn't be doing this because you're making somebody work hard? All you have to do is just rotate the chart 90 degrees, minor infraction. Versus this, which is, absolutely misleading. Bar chart not starting with the value axes, not starting at 0, and not even showing people the value axes. So what are we going to do? Express this as a screaming cat, and this as a wonderful initialism or acronym coming from Christopher Danielson called a TURD, where a TURD is a truly unfortunate representation of data, TURD. And in discussion with the editor, it said it's probably not worth it to have that many designations. There will be an icon, but I said, but what about this notion of it being a screaming cat and the problem associated with it, and the objections getting, and realizing the term that we're using. Remember, when we first did the book, we just called it the cat icon. But this screaming thing kind of says, well, you suck, and well, no, most people are not setting out to make something bad. So instead, the editor said, dial it back a little bit, and instead calling it a scaredy-cat and going, hey, this is, it may mean misleading or it may mean unhelpful. This icon means there's a problem with it. You're going to have to read a little bit to find out if it's just unhelpful or in fact it's misleading. So I want to show you a few examples of some scaredy-cats. And I know we're so used to calling it a screaming cat, it sounds wrong, but some scaredy-cats out in the wild, as well as some sensational work. If I had an icon for this is exemplary, I would use it. This one made me cry a little bit. This is from Tableau's website, and the creating the importance of a data culture in the organization. And I'm looking at these side-by-side donut charts, and this is not particularly helpful. This is not a great way to do the comparison. The Wall Street Journal, COVID-19 death toll is even worse than it looks, because they're trying to show the COVID deaths and all excess deaths. And if you look at that largest one there, it doesn't look like there's that many excess deaths, but that's twice as many deaths. We're terrible at judging the area of circles, let alone semicircles. So this is, perhaps the worst way to convey this visually is what they chose here. Another one that bothered me is just see how big DoorDash, Airbnb, and Snowflake have gotten based on their IPOs and market caps associated with it. And hold on a sec. Let me see if I've got this up and running. So here is from the article that's in the Wall Street Journal, and not a great way to show the respective market capitalizations with area of circles, explaining how this all is going to work. And then you can play with this and see, what would it be like to try to get something which has Airbnb's market cap as of that moment and go, oh, well, let me see, I'll put Marriott in here. Let me put Wyndham in here. Ooh, gee, how much bigger is Marriott than Wyndham? No idea. Let me put Accor in here. Let me put Booking in here. Oh, congratulations, the area of all those things together have exceeded this. And it works. And I'm thinking, why not just have a bar that's a certain length and have another bar, or show how the things stack up within the bar? It would be such an easier and faster read. So one is, I have a whole question, then we had a side conversation about this. Is this really a great way to look at the valuations, especially since they're changing on a daily basis? But two, is this a good way to do the comparisons? And for some reason, this one didn't bother me as much. And I guess that's because I'm inconsistent and hypocritical, but it was a similar type of thing where you could, let me see if I can get drag. Hey, I'm going to put Pennsylvania in here. I'm going to put Georgia in here, to see, can I get above the threshold? I'm going to put Michigan over here. I'm going to put Wisconsin over here. I'm going to put Arizona over here. And put Minnesota over here, and Biden wins, and you can see how these things work. And I'm realizing, yeah, but you could have done the same thing with the stacked bar chart, and it would have been absolutely fine. So I am hard pressed, and I'll ask my colleagues in a minute, why is it that I, think this is terrible, and why did I find this really engaging? And it may have been, it was such a welcome relief to every other chart that was out there. I do want to give some major praise to some stuff from the New York Times, which has been just sensational. This was amazing, trying to explain inside this particular coronavirus variant and how they come about, and the amino acid sequencing. And it was a very difficult concept that was made very clear, this particular deep dive. And I just love that they use this Cahill-Keyes projection of a map. rather than the more classic maps that we're used to seeing. So this is a very hard concept, and I think they did a great job explaining it. The other was, when could we reach herd immunity? And this was this wonderful what-if analysis, and I'll show you. You can try this for yourself, as I think it's worthwhile. Hold on one sec, let me find it. There we go. So it introduces the concept up here. They've done a lovely job, even with the gradient fill, suggesting, it's unclear when we reach herd immunity, and saying, well, at the current pace, vaccine immunity versus herd or total immunity is July. If we increase the supply, or a huge increase of the supply, what's going to happen? What happens if we relax social distancing? Keep measures in place, ease up the pace, or end precautions now? We reach a threshold in May, but at a huge consequence of many more people dying. So some scaredy-cats from the Wall Street Journal, in my opinion, and some, I think, really exemplary work from the New York Times. And I'll stop sharing and hear from my colleagues on their thoughts with this.
Actually, can you continue sharing and go back to the New York Times election viz? I think there's two great comments. One from Megan, who suggests the reason you like the New York Times one is that the goal of that is to see, is the Biden circle bigger than the dotted circle? That's literally the goal. And then Manuel has said also the size of each state's electoral votes is a known thing. We know that California has X amount of electoral votes. So, I mean, I don't.
That is a really valid point.
Whereas in the other one, the goal there is to see how much bigger is one circle compared to the other. And Emmanuel makes the point, it's like, well, the market cap of banking. It's like, well, no idea. I mean, nobody knows, right? So
they do show this at the very beginning.
Well, yeah. How many? I didn't notice. I saw it. I didn't internalize a single bit of it.
Either
so I think Emmanuel and
you're kind of playing guessing, and I'm sure. I'm not sure. I suspect that the group that put this together saw this. But I think those are very valid points.
Yeah. I in praise of the circle, right? I've been recommending this. There was a few reasons I've been recommending this book. I don't know if people can see my screen. The Book of Circles by Manuel Lima. This is a gorgeous book of a curation of many things circular, from biology and history and physics and data visualization. And it's really interesting because there's many reasons not to like circular data visualizations, but Manuel Lima in this book really makes the point that but humans are drawn to circles, and sometimes engagement is what you need, and you want to draw people in. So that changed my perspective on circular diagrams. It's a very good book. And
read the Steve Jobs biography and all the dialogue boxes in on the first Mac.
Yeah. Amanda or Jeff, anything to add?
I think there's an analysis issue on the other one. I mean, in this case, it's electorate votes by states. It makes sense to me that this is flawed to me in another way. Is when I think of DoorDash and Airbnb, they're technology companies. That's why they're trading at these huge multiples. DoorDash cannot be compared to a brick and mortar Wendy's, Cheesecake Factory. So Grubhub and DoorDash are maybe comparable. Airbnb is probably more comparable to DoorDash than it is, the hotel chains up there. So I just don't know if the comparisons are even valuable in what I'm doing here. And then you're talking about market caps over different periods of time when they went public. The markets change, and it's like saying, oh, you went public during the Great Recession. That's going to be completely different than something later. This is a relatively short window of time, but I don't like the comparison at all.
Yeah, and I would say that on the comparison on the hospitality companies up above, I mean, it is a mix too of other travel and commerce companies like Expedia and Booking.com, I mean, those are similar to Airbnb. Those don't own property. Those are booking sites. And so they're probably more comparable. I do think that in the hospitality industry, people do compare themselves against Airbnb being a big competitor, which makes it a little bit more valid from a comparison in my mind. But I still agree that the just overall interactivity doesn't make as much sense to me. I do think if you go to the herd immunity graphic and the interactive there were some great comments in the chat box also about people liking this and the kind of scenario building. I think one of the things they did a nice job with here is I like that they restricted the scenarios. More similar to like the flat and the curve scenarios that played out in one of their graphics last year versus making it a fully just kind of enter in my own date situation. Because I think it lets them have a little bit more control over what that narrative looks like and what that narrative is. If you click between these, what I think is interesting to me, if you click between these again, I'm always curious how people interpret those kind of fuzzy gradients because the reality is that is the lower bound of maybe that has been somewhat kind of discussed and established, but that whole gradient is somewhat fuzzy. And I've seen some critiques of the model that was used in building this out in terms of not being aware enough or considering enough some of the impacts vaccine hesitancy or other things could have once we address some of the supply side constraints. And so I think there's just a lot of what ifs here that I always wonder, what does this cause someone to do? So if I'm playing with this and looking at this, what's the goal of this in terms of my personal actions, activities, or what I'm advocating for my family or my community around schools reopening or something else? Does seeing crossing the initial threshold in July make me feel like that's okay? Like, I just don't feel like we've got clear timelines at this point. So I'm always curious how someone reads this and then personalizes it to them. Because they are models. I mean, these are models, just like the models we had around cases and deaths before.
Matthias agrees with you. Good about thinking about the motivation of a chart. It's interesting you say scenario building, Amanda. I've actually, have you ever done anything like this in a business or seen this in a non-media style way? It seems to me like something that would be very effective in organizations.
I think I've seen it modeled out and done work with that in more kind of business or e-commerce type environments where you're trying to model out and look at different ways in which you expect kind of your spending or your sales to go ahead and change over time and go ahead and model and look at what different scenarios look like when you plot them. I don't know that I've ever built something that was kind of maybe this complex in terms of incorporating this many different variables in, but I'm also not an economist or advanced financial modeler. So I defer to the experts on that one.
Steve or Jeff, have you ever used data visualization for sort of scenario building?
We have, yeah. I can think of some financial scenarios, more in the financial space, but not exactly like this. I like the way that they did it. You know, sort of the buttons, you press them and they're sort of predefined. I don't recall ever doing anything like that.
We have an example in the book, don't we, from was it Josh, or Matt Chambers, a what if?
Matt Chambers, the what if on minimum wage.
Yeah. That's slightly similar to this. What happens if you change the minimum wage you pay your workers? It's very, very interesting. All right. Okay, Steve, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the comments on Scaredy-cat, Danger Cat. I quite like the phrase Danger Cat.
Danger Cat.
I also noticed it'd be interesting to go through our book and see how many are similar to the slide you showed, in that how many of the charts that literally we built have we put a danger cat on or a cat on, because we built the chart to show a mistake. So it's not, we haven't always used the cat to go, you suck. It's just like, here's an abstract thing, don't do it.
Remember, Andy, it was just called the cat. And then we got this matifier, the screaming cat, and it just has, this, this is, you're a bad person, you're making bad stuff, you're doing bad work. And it just may not be as helpful as you would like it to be. So trying to dial it back a little bit.
All right. And I can see chat is now descending into comparing Danger Mouse to Danger Cat. Americans, on my co-host Americans, do you know who Danger Mouse is? Did that make it across?
I do.
Danger Mouse, another animated series that ages, well, amazing British.
Hey, I gotta ask Jeff something. It's just because I was just blown away by that Pointer Sister song and going, this is what is being shown to elementary school kids. And this is insanely hip with odd meters and modulation. Jeff, did you know that tune?
I did not until I played it this
And
morning.
I'm thinking, okay, that's what people in the 70s got. And what do they get now? Baby Shark. I mean,
Let me tell you, we've got basically a list of 4 songs right now on repeat for our 2-year-old, and none of them are songs I enjoy. I promise you that.
Get some Pointer Sisters. It's quite, if you go and read the Wikipedia page about that song, which I did in preparation for this, it's quite interesting how they got involved and they jammed and came up with this funky tune. So
oh no, and now someone's got Baby Shark in their head. Oh, we're sorry.
No, well, I've been learning that on the piano.
Who did that? Oh boy, get it. You know what? I need to have a filter that has a screaming cat over my face.
What we're going to do between the end of this and the start of the after party, I'm going to replay the Pointer Sisters so we can all reset and escape the horror, and then give ourselves a little 1-minute break. Okay. Hopefully, or maybe I'll just play Baby Shark. I like the idea that we just redo this to Baby Chart and just start training our children young, right? All right, let's move on. Amanda, you are up next, and I guess a slight change in pace. We're going to talk about New York Times front pages.
Well, we needed something lighthearted, right? So people can have Baby Shark going ahead and floating around in their head as we dive into this topic. So I guess a pivot off of the herd immunity conversation in question is there was a lot of conversation, especially over the last week, about the various different ways outlets, including the New York Times, especially visualize this milestone of 500,000 deaths from COVID-19. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the examples of what was created and put out there, but also some of the controversy and conversation about what works well in the sense of what's being created and designed. So as we look at kind of the New York Times, if we look back to what they did last year for one of the other big milestones around US deaths nearing 100,000, they had actually gone ahead and put up individual names and lines from obituaries onto the front page of the paper. And they actually reflect on the reasons why they do these designs in various online articles that they put out in the New York Times. And we'll get to one of the funny and kind of odd ironies of how things have changed over the last year in their own design decisions and things they said they wouldn't do that they're doing now. And then this past week, they put out this new graphic that shows a progressive series of dots that goes ahead and works its way down. The top is at the very beginning of the timeline and then moving down the timeline to the very bottom. And in writing about how and why they designed the graphic the way they did, they focused on and really emphasized pace and the interest in showing just kind of how the pace has accelerated and picked up by the density of the dots near the bottom, showing how quickly we've seen kind of an accelerated number of deaths, and you can see the darkening of those kind of waves. So, I mean, big moment that data visualizations are taking over front pages of newspapers in itself. And thinking about what other newspapers have done. I get the Washington Post at home on Sundays with the intent of reading it most of the time, the actual reading of it, usually a week or two later. But they went ahead and took it to a very different tack of using for this same milestone, focus on a headline around every 28 seconds in terms of the frequency with which someone died from COVID in January in the US during our kind of third wave peak with those images and those pictures. I had an interior section that was very story driven. So very story, photo driven, focusing on different roles and different people with this big block text, just big number. So a very different way of visualizing that information. And if we go ahead and we look beyond what is on the print publications as one medium for communicating information, there were also a number of digital releases. So the Washington Post had their own kind of virtual environment, making comparisons around 500,000 dead, a number almost too large to grasp. And I think as we walk through these examples, I'll show a couple of them. I think an important thing to consider is that different people are going to react and respond differently to different graphics. And I think a lot of data journalists and others and data artists are really grasping at kind of how do we communicate something this big to the I believe, misattributed quote around one death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. And have we veered into that statistical space? So the Post, in addition to doing their front page cover and their story-driven piece, had a number of different charts that they presented and various visual comparisons, things like comparing like if 500,000 passengers traveled by bus, thinking back to the way that we often talk about kind of the tragedy of a plane crashing and what happens when that happens. And noting that in January, an average of 3,100 people died every day from COVID-19, and a caravan of buses containing that many passengers would span more than half a mile. For those of us who work or are outside the US, I'm sorry that I can't easily and quickly convert that to metric. Comparing it to space that people might have awareness of in terms of comparing it to how many people would fill Arlington if we look at Arlington National Cemetery, and that we could basically fill a new Arlington cemetery. Some very pithy graphics that I think one of my co-hosts really didn't like at all, that tried to make comparisons around the point at which the US death toll from COVID surpassed different milestones and making them kind of postcard-ish and maybe taking it a step too far around levity. But people I spoke with thought that these were really sticky and interesting and gave them some contextualization that was helpful. And some more illustrations where people moved away from graphics and moved away from pictures and into some of these sketchy illustrations, like this example from National Geographic. So you can dig around online and find tons of different ways that people have tried to kind of take this really big number that has really weighty meat and meaning for a lot of people and actually make it more personal. And I know from a personal perspective, I mean, we lost a grandparent to COVID, and some of the experiences of kind of managing and thinking about that one death or that one dot is very different from trying to conceptualize 500,000 deaths in some way, shape, or form. And National Geographic back in September, Andy actually flagged this. I hadn't read it back then, but actually wrote a great article talking about kind of the challenge of the numbing to these big numbers. So when we keep saying big numbers and graphs and charts and information over and over and over again, is it actually helping us to better wrap our heads around what's happening in the world around us and make sense of it and find ways to grieve for people who have lost others and those who have people who have lost themselves, different people within their lives, is actually trying to go ahead and present that information visually helpful? And are we doing it in ways that is helpful for understanding, or have we gotten to a place of what they noted here as psychic numbing, this idea that at some point we have to kind of create some boundaries for our psyche around what we actually can try to conceptualize and make sense of, and recognizing that there are so many things going on in the world today that are tragedies of their own accord. There are so many challenges that we're facing in terms of a lot of how each of us individually are grappling with the pandemic, that this question around this arithmetic of compassion, I think, is a really interesting one. And one that got raised by one of the folks who works in data visualization, by Francis, who actually wrote a whole thread and a whole blog post where he said, the more I think about today's front page of the New York Times, the more it is for me another watershed moment for data visualization. And watershed in the sense that it's something that's on the front cover of the New York Times. But his reflection focused more on not for good reasons, in the sense that the graph is confronting us with the limitations of data visualization to convey tragedies than where we are right now. And I found it interesting because I went back and read the article, looking at the article from a year, almost May of last year, looking at the page full of names versus the page full of dots. And in the article talking about the design process for the page full of names, they made a very deliberate choice and said putting 100,000 dots or stick figures on a page doesn't really tell you very much about who these people were and the lives that they lived. And so they veered away from that choice or that decision for that smaller number, still a big number, but a smaller number. And eventually maybe crossed into a threshold where it's just not feasible to personalize it as much. I'm not sure. I'll be curious to hear from my co-hosts on that. And so it makes me think about the various different mediums that we use to display grief and loss and those kind of things. And these kind of physical installations, this is from the AIDS quilt that was done decades ago to commemorate those who lost their lives to AIDS. And you can see the personalization of all these quilted squares. And we've seen that similar kind of physical installations done around COVID deaths. And for me, I found that those have been much more compelling and kind of helped me kind of grapple with some of the size and the scale and the gravity of the loss. On a personal level, there's someone in Texas who's actually putting flags in his own yard as individual people die. And there was an art installation down the street from me in DC where that same kind of field of flags was created to commemorate them crossing that milestone around 200,000, 250,000 deaths. And this is a photograph of the artist who I spoke to for a little while when I was walking around this field. And it was really interesting hearing her discuss her process for how this installation, this kind of data art installation in its own way and memorial, helped to allow her to process some of what was happening. And it was cathartic in its own way. And so I'd like to think that as people were going ahead and putting together their own metaphors and visual examples of these various different ways to make sense of this big number, beyond just writing out the number itself, I think it's good to recognize who the designer is behind these different charts and graphs. And no one sets out to create a screaming cat. I think each of these different examples probably sticks with and hits people in different ways. So I'd be curious of all the various different examples and thinking about kind of the New York Times front cover and the conversation about these various different pieces, what my co-host thought of the graphic that came out last week and about the broader question about how we visualize large numbers that also can be so intensely personal. I know, Jeff, I think you had kind of dug in a little bit more to some of the design pieces. Do you want to go ahead and pick it up and hand it over from there?
Yeah, I definitely have comments there. I retweeted Francis' tweet and said, thoughtful and interesting post that I mostly disagree with, right off the bat. I didn't agree with the premise that it was, the wrong way to show the information, if you will. And I think, there's something, I love the fact that we're talking about it and thinking about it in a personalized way. Understanding limitations, number one, this is a print document. It's not an interactive visualization. And, in an interactive visualization, you could do something different. There's a great Tableau public visualization done by Soha. I think that's right. It's a beautiful visualization, and she's looking at Gundes and plots a lot of different things. But at the bottom, each dot is a person, and when you hover over that dot, you can kind of get the information of that person. Of course, Tableau Public's going to refresh on me here and do its thing because I let it time out. But you can play with this and hover over a dot. It gives you a tooltip about the incident, the person, the age, what happened, and it just tells you a lot of things about it. And so you can start exploring the visualization. Of course, a live demo is not going to work here for me, so I apologize here. But there's one. So 33-year-old male, and so on. And so you can hover and play with that. The other thing that was interesting to me, Amanda, you sent a link about their thought process in creating this graphic. And there were comments, 107 comments on that blog post. And this one jumped out at me. This is the most powerful front page of the New York Times I have seen. The graphic with its beautiful and horrific gradations cascading down the length of the paper brought me to tears, and my children gathered around me to look. Like, how do you get more powerful than that? And it says, we stared at the dots and felt the history. And I think this next section, graphic design, visual charting, page layout can sometimes convey a more powerful story than words, like more than putting the names of those people on there. I have put this page in my children's memory book for them to find again. I thought that was powerful. And a lot of comments along those same lines. People said, all I can say is, wow, every one of those circles represents an individual, families, friends, coworkers. Other people said, bravo, what a great, powerful graphic, and so on. And then the last one hit me because that's exactly where I went. Another way to think about it is imagine the city of Tucson disappears over the course of a year. That's exactly where I went. I thought, wow, there's a little bit more, there's 300 some thousand people in the city of Cincinnati. There's about 800,000 people in our county in Cincinnati. And so as you know, I played with this graphic this week, just trying to see like what this would look like if I made the city of Cincinnati disappear. And so this was kind of my version of those 500,000 dots of, in a course of a year, the city of Cincinnati the Hamilton County would mostly just disappear, and all these people would be gone. So I think the dots on the front page is a really powerful story. I appreciate the reflections of it, that, it may not be personal, and at some point, maybe it passes understanding, but I had the exact opposite reaction that Francis had.
Thanks, Jeff. I find it fascinating. I think you referred slightly to it, Amanda, as well. The design essay on how the New York Times went about this is fascinating. I think my reaction to it, I don't really have much to add from what Jeff showed, and particularly the comments, but it goes a little bit to Dataviz critique. I vehemently do not think this is a watershed moment in data visualization because, well, this isn't even a new problem. This has been discussed at length in the past. And I think one of the things that I see a lot in criticism is people go, well, I've seen something, then people reflect on what they've seen, and then they go, well, it should have done X, Y, and Z, X, Y, or Z. And it's like, no, it could have done X, Y, and Z. Right? Every chart is a compromise. Every visualization is a choice. We can build something that is interactive and requires hours of your time to physically walk around, or we can build something that you can see at a glance. They are both valid options. And So I just call on any, Francis is a great guy, right? But criticism should be about things that could have been done, because the designer has made a conscious choice about what they tried to do hopefully with intent, as I'm sure happened here with the New York Times.
Steve,
I'll give my 1 minute spiel, because I think I feel we are encroaching something more having to do with ethics than it has to do with, is this a good way to visualize this business scenario, which is where my comfort zone is. I think we're all very excited to see the incredible importance data visualization has had in the last year, going back to Harry Stevens and visualizing Flattening the Curve, and John Byrne Murdoch at the Financial Times, and seeing, oh my gosh, you are helping me understand this unfathomably difficult problem and scary situation. My problem with the New York Times and the other things is you are trying to quantify tragedy. This thing is 10 times worse than when 50,000 people die or something like that, and trying to enumerate something which is not enumeratable. And you're trying to shock me out of my complacency, and I am not complacent, but by shocking me and more and trying to make me less numb, you are going to in fact make me more callous. Or this is totally just my opinion or how I'm reacting to these things. So I'm remembering the New York Times doing the, oh my gosh, look at the unemployment numbers. We're going to have this chart go the entire span of the entire page. We're going to shock the crap out of you right now. And so when something really bad happens again, I'm going to go, oh, well, I'm used to it because I saw that other thing happening there. It's every time you do this, you are just going to make somebody, I fear, make somebody more numb. I don't want to be more numb. I don't want to be less feeling and empathetic. And I'm finding when you quantify something like this, that's what's happening. And we do it in language, all the time. It's not enough for something to be unique. It has to be very unique, which it can't be. Unique means one of a kind. Personal pet peeve is the dumbing down of the word awesome. It's like saying double plus good. Good is not enough. We have to do these other type of things. So I fear that in trying to get people to feel the impact of this, we may be making people more callous. And I don't know if that's the case or not.
I think it's an interesting question about the kind of how we engage with visualizations and in what context and for what purpose, right? And I think that on the flip side, if everyone had kind of stepped away from and was no longer drawing attention with visualizations or other things to these kind of stories and this information, there would be an equal backlash of criticism saying everyone has forgotten about the loss that people have experienced and the frustrations that people would feel when they feel like they lost people unnecessarily and that they're being forgotten. And so I think there's this challenge of, is the goal to memorialize and create space for grief? Is the goal to go ahead and kind of shock people into being motivated to do something, whether it's choose to get vaccinated or continue to wear a mask? Like, to me, it comes back to what are we trying to influence someone to do? And that's central to any visualization you're creating. What's your goal? What's your purpose? And I do like those articles with the New York Times designers who talk about kind of what their intent was and why they made choices that they did, because a lot of times those choices are kind of hidden and we don't always know that. And so as we think about the ways we get exposed to this information, I do think it speaks to the challenges of having a social media feed and other things that kind of constantly serve up this information to you. I hope on the flip side that the more people see data visualizations and at least one or two of these things is sticky to them in some ways, it gets people excited about what this field can do and what it looks like, and creates points of engagement for people with this information. I mean, you go back to some of the John Byrne Murdoch pieces from a year ago on whoever thought we'd be actually like regularly publishing things in a log scale. Yeah. And so from a numeracy and data literacy perspective, it's not that everything will be sticky, but my hope is that we really, maybe this isn't the watershed moment of the front page of the New York Times, but I do think it's been somewhat of a watershed year of visualization being really kind of in the spotlight. And I hope helping to support and enable greater data literacy and understanding.
Yeah. Kimberly, there's lots of great comments in the chat. Running out of time to address them all. Do please stay for the after party if you have things to say. Kimberly actually has a really nice bit of advice that she's shared. What do you want people thinking, feeling, or doing differently after seeing your data story? Mm-hmm. Literally every word in that piece of advice is really important. So I think that's a great thing as visualization designers we can all take from this. Great. Okay. Let's move on because it's lightning round time now, and I'm super excited about lightning round. That's my pet hate of an overused word. I'm just excited, okay? I'm excited about lightning round. Jeff, you're first.
Lightning round. I spent some time visualizing some political data. There's a great blog post at the end of the year by Ken Flairledge. And I know, Steve, you spent some time on this as well, the different ways that people were visualizing the election map. And just think about, I'll just start, with a map like the state map. Ohio, it went red. So all of a sudden it's a red state, but it's not really, if you look at the county level, well, most of the state is red, but Cincinnati and Columbus and Cleveland, the major cities, they went blue. So the cities are blue. I decided to take a different approach on it and dive into household level data and visualizing, blue, red at the household. Now, this isn't the 2020 vote. This is registered people who are registered Republican or registered Democrat. But it just gives a different sense that, an entire state is not one color or another. An entire county is not one color or another. It really comes down to the household level. And there were some interesting things I saw where the west side of Cincinnati and the east side of Cincinnati broke, in clear divides, almost down streets that were really interesting, where the downtown area was much more blue. And then I took that a step further. I went down into the neighborhoods and looked at, west side going down Glenway Avenue and the east side of Cincinnati. I looked at, individual neighborhoods and the details of these. When you get down into this, the blocks and the streets just tell a completely different story. One that jumped out to me is the city of Norwood here in Cincinnati is that red line dividing the city of Norwood. And when you cross that one street, a lot of red houses, but on the other side of the street, when you're in Bond Hill, mostly blue. And so streets divide these political maps. And then I even went a step further in my own neighborhood. I was curious, just looking at houses, and 14%, 9 of the houses right in my own area had a registered Democrat and a registered Republican living in the same household. Like the house was divided among a husband and a wife or their kids. So I thought that was interesting. And another one that jumped out are all the people that weren't registered, that the majority of the city, just over half of the city actually weren't registered for one party or the other. So I thought that was interesting. Shout out to Ken Fields, who did a similar map. He mapped household level across the country. The zoom doesn't quite go in as much as the analysis I did, but it really does show a much more granular picture of the data. So that was my lightning topic.
Andy, you're on mute.
Oh,
we can't take him anyplace.
I know it's my button doesn't press properly anymore. Anyway, that's great. Thanks, Jeff. Anything to add, Amanda or Steve, or should we crack on?
I just love looking at the more granular data. I think it's really interesting. So I'm always grateful when people take the time to sift through that really detailed information, because it does tell a much more nuanced story.
It's amazing there's a horizontal line somewhere just off to the right of the center in that Cincinnati. It's amazing how stark that is. Oh yeah, on the right hand side it's very clear. Wow. I always find, as a British person trying to read these graphs, it's very hard because we flip red and blue to left and right wing parties the other way around in the UK. So I'm like, wow, look at all those left wing supporters when you're actually looking at the right wings. All right, thanks, Jeff.
Stellar
go
work
ahead, Steve.
Great use of a pie chart. You can see that's more than that, or more than this. Really, it's great stuff.
All right, lightning round from Andy is me. I'm going to talk about blue and orange. Aren't these guys amazing? These are the snout-nosed monkeys that live in the mountainous regions of China. You'd think this is terrible camouflage, but unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about cute cats. I'm going to talk about the icy blast that hit the US. Here's a chart from the New York Times from last week. And orange blue, I just want to talk about my existential journey with orange and blue, the semantics of this color, and some of what Steve and I have argued about for many years. So look at this map. This is incredible. It shows the blue, right? Brrr, blue, it's cold, right? We see that cold, icy blast that got all the way to Texas and caused such great disruption last week. And of course, there's the legend. It helps us understand and emphasize that blue is here. It's the lowest number on the chart. And yet, let's have a look at how data visualization tools do this. So this is a default map in Tableau showing a diverging color palette. The default is orange and blue. But can you tell me, is Texas outperforming California or underperforming compared to California? Well, we just agreed, like blue is cold, right? Every day, my lived experience as a human being is I go outside and I see the warm, hot, orange sun shining down on me. And then in the winter, I see the blue ice and the bluish snow, right? So my lived life suggests that California is doing really bad. But when you look at Tableau's choice of colors, blue is high. How come it isn't like this? My semantic definition of this color palette is that Texas is on fire. It's hot, right? They're the adjectives we use. And yet that's not how Tableau or other tools chose to do this. What's going on? Well, time for 1 minute of color theory and then some advice from a legend in the science of color. Here's a color wheel showing this. This is a version of a color wheel which shows primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And opposite colors are called complementary. They have high contrast with each other, which is why red and green has been such a good traditional choice for data visualization in years gone by. Super high contrast, complementary colors. And in many parts of the world, we have a really strong semantic connection to red being danger, green being good. So hurrah, this is the way we should visualize good and bad in data viz. Except a large part of your population, up to 10% of males looking at your visualizations have color vision deficiency. They can't distinguish red from green. So they are left in the dark as to which end of the spectrum either of these visualizations is. Okay, fine. So the data visualization world thought, well, what can we do about that? Let's move to a different part of the color wheel and choose different complementary colors. And we've kind of settled largely on orange v blue. The reason that, well, I'll come into some of the reasons behind this, but it's a complementary color pair. And the number of people with CVD who can't distinguish these two colors is astonishingly small. So this color scheme is something virtually the entire human population can distinguish, and thus we go orange and blue. So that's the reason why. But what has always been the core of the argument I have with Steve is, why is blue high? Why? Steve hasn't been able to give me a good answer. Sorry, Steve. So I turned to Maureen Stone, who is Director of Research at Tableau, computer scientist, legend, and her career has been largely spent specializing in the understanding of color. She's amazing. So she gave me these things to think about. And if I make any factual errors in the next few seconds, it's on me, not on her, because she knows her stuff. So why does Tableau default to blue as the higher? And can I reconcile myself to this moving forward? Well, first of all, she said, you could think about this scale as being positive on both sides, because distance from 0 could be expressed as a positive number. So Andy, get off the obsession with whether one of these is negative or positive. Very interesting. And secondly, she said, well, let's look at how color theory works again. Here's the color wheel. We have regions of the color wheel which almost everybody agrees can be called warm or cold. At the top of the warm ones, at the top of the cold ones. Initially, red and green was in the warm and cold region. And so why not rotate and find other colors which are similar-ish, but still stay within the warm, cold regions of the color circle. So orange is so orange and blue are still warm and cold, and they kept the orientation of the legend because of the proximity here in sort of warm and cold colors. Oh, that's brilliant, Maureen. And then she pointed out the most obvious things. People like blue. It's not a surprise that it's the most popular color in the world. As Maureen said, It's like, when was the last time you bought anything orange, Andy? I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, here I am wearing blue. I'm wearing blue by accident today, but I don't own anything orange except when I'm going high-vis. And that also leads to Amanda's room is blue. I see no orange. I see Steve's background, I guess, could be orangish. Probably brown. Anyway, also Tableau defaults to blue, partly because it's a nice color. But when Tableau was choosing what is our default color going to be, they went blue is safe, it's loved, and it's corporate. That was a very intentional choice, which I'd never really thought of before. And I like, so if everything you see by default is blue, and then you put a diverging palette on, and suddenly everything becomes orange, or orange, or blue means bad. That's not a good association with Tableau's defaults. And then she said, at the end of the day, Andy, the orange blue was to a certain extent a designerly choice. We tried to choose the best defaults we could for the best defaults we could, which would be analytically valid for the most people for the most analytical approaches. And you know what? If you don't like it, we gave you the chance to change the color palette. And I mean, I just am in debt to Maureen for so many pieces of wisdom and knowledge. And I think I can finally say, I understand it now. I map my blue to cold, but blue's a lovely color. So I've got to be happy with it being at that end of the spectrum too. That's the end of my blue-orange stuff. Anybody got anything to say, or should we go straight to after party?
Andy, why don't you show what the link to the next chart chat is going to be, and a promo for the workshop coming up in Asia Pacific, and then we can go to the after party.
Yeah, gosh, do I have that? I don't actually have that slide. Oh my gosh.
I've got them both.
Go for it.
Steve, the pinch hitter here.
Okay, so the next chart chat is going to be 4 weeks from today, March 25th, same time, and the URL is bigpic.me/20cc2020. Lots of resources, recordings. You can find chart chat recordings, videos here at bigbookofdashboards.com. And for people that are in Asia Pacific time zones, I'm going to be doing the dashboard design workshop on April 20th and 22nd. It will be at 8:30 p.m. my time, but at a delightful time for people everywhere from Singapore to New Zealand. So that's bigpic.me/apppack2021. But do join us for Chart Chat again. Bigpic.me CC20. Let me stop sharing. And so here is what is going to happen. Those of you who want to move on, sorry we went a little bit over. It's been great having you. Those who would like to be in the after party, we're going to make you all panelists. And that would allow you to speak and show yourselves, or you can just listen. That's up to you. So if you're done with us for the day, it's been great having you here. If you would like to continue with us, we will turn the recording off so you can say things and not fear that it will be recorded. And we are going to go through the process of turning you all into panelists.
And while we do that, I'm just going to give you all a little blast of the pinball song again.
Oh, thank you.
Here we go.
Thank you very much, everybody.